Hey guys, we're just going to get started here in a few minutes. So this is the first time we've done a live Facebook feed. So we're kind of excited to be able to reach out to everyone this way. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to do this than go to webinar programs. So hopefully the feed will carry through. If you guys are there, then you can hopefully send in questions. But we're going to get started here in just a couple of minutes. As many of you know, reaching out to FMCSA and trying to understand the hours of service exemptions and ELD requirements has been a bit of a challenge for just about everyone. One of the unique things that we've got going on is the agricultural exemption and how it works with the hours of service. About 4 years ago, FMCSA came out with MAP 21, which changed the agricultural exemptions tremendously for many of the carriers that operate for hire and privately. For the carriers that operate the agricultural exemption beyond the 150 air mile radius, it has always been known with FMCSA that we are to log the entire event if you're going beyond the 150 air mile radius. But that has recently changed, and that's what this live Facebook event is about, and what we're trying to do right now is help everyone understand how you use the agricultural exemption, because there has been a drastic change in the way that it works. So to get into it and not take too much of your time, we'll get started with what the agricultural exemption is today. Today, the agricultural exemption applies to anyone hauling agricultural commodities or anything actually for the furtherance of the production of agriculture within 150 air mile radius of the source of the commodity during harvest seasons of the states that you're operating in. Now, that right in itself is what has changed dramatically, is what is the source, and the source is where you're picking up the commodity. So you get 150 air miles from where you're picking up the commodity to deliver your agricultural product and be exempt from the hours of service. And when you're exempt from hours of service in the agricultural exemption, you are 100% exempt from any part of that 395 regulation, meaning that you record that time as off-duty, not driving. In FMCSA's mind, agricultural exemption hauling is similar to being asleep. They count 0 against your hours of service. So operating within 150 air miles during harvest season is very simple here in Illinois. Illinois has a year-round harvest season from January 1st to December 31st. So anytime you're hauling agricultural commodities within 150 air miles of the source within the state of Illinois, you will be hours of service exempt completely, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You still can be subject to 392.3, which is fatigue driving. So be aware that that can come into play, but for the most part, you would be exempt from the hours of service. Henceforth, being exempt from hours of service, you would also be exempt from the you'll also be exempt from everything that's there. Sorry, got a little hung up. Still learning on this one. So where the change has really affected a lot of people is that now FMCSA, in about August, they have decided that if you're hauling agricultural commodities beyond the 150 air mile radius, you now have the ability, the entire time you're within 150 air miles of the source of your product, you will be ag exempt. Once you're carrying it beyond that 150 air mile radius, once you reach what is actually 172 land miles from the source, you now turn on your logbook. Once you turn on your logbook, you still have your entire 14-hour workday and 11 hours driving time to operate your truck and move forward. So what FMCSA has done is they've essentially allowed you to turn on your clock on top of the hours you've already operated when you're operating under the ag exemption. So I'll give you a perfect scenario of this. If you operate out of Springfield, is where your home base is, and you're picking up a load in Bloomington, an agricultural load of grain that is going to Indiana, you can go all the way to Bloomington, you can load, and you can drive right now 150 air miles or 172 land miles from the source of where you picked up that load before you turn on your logbook to log now your 14-hour workday and 11 hours driving time if your destination is beyond the 150 air miles. So once you move forward, once you get beyond that 150 air miles or 172 land miles, turn on your logbook, you log as normal. You have a normal workday. Returning back, if you're returning back within the same day, you can actually turn your logbook off whenever you get close to your next source or within 150 air miles of your next source of an agricultural commodity. This is the drastic change that FMCSA has done, is that you can now turn your logbook on and off throughout the day without affecting your daily or weekly hourly limit of the logbook rules. So with the agricultural commodity hauling beyond 150 air miles, you can turn your logbook on and off throughout the day. I'm going to repeat this. As long as you are within, once you become within 150 air miles of the commodity that you will be hauling. So that's a huge, huge change for agricultural commodity haulers. In addition to this change in being able to turn your logbooks on and off throughout the day, they've also expanded the definition to include all livestock, bees, if you're a big bee hauler, and agricultural equipment. Essentially, anything that is for the furtherance of the production of agriculture, can be sold, used, or moved at a farm, at an ag retail or wholesale location, will now qualify for the agricultural exemption under this new interpretation from FMCSA. So for many people, this can actually be a benefit to be able to finish your workday without being stuck somewhere because of long loading times, because you've essentially expanded your workday to the point that you'll be able to utilize those hours when you're close to the source of your product that you're hauling. So that has been the major change with the agricultural exemption, is to be able to turn that clock on and off throughout the day and not have those hours count against your 14-hour workday or your weekly totals. So that's where it goes. Got a quick question here, and I'll answer any questions anybody throws up there. As far as dryer gas, if you can prove the entire load of propane or gas is being hauled to a farm, then yes, you can claim that under the agricultural exemption. But that is typically difficult to do unless it is going directly to, and the entire load is going directly to the farm. If it's going to a rack somewhere, if you're hauling dryer gas and it's going to a distribution point, they cannot guarantee that all that is going directly to a dryer, then you cannot claim the agricultural exemption for dryer gas. Other things that typically operate in the gray area or the no-no area for agricultural exemption hauling, construction equipment. If you're hauling an excavator, bulldozer, any type of construction equipment, that is typically very difficult to justify agricultural only. I would encourage you, if you're going to haul construction equipment for agricultural, that you make sure you have a bill of lading that states that it is going to a farm or it is going to an agricultural production something. But if you can't do that, you're not going to be able to haul bulldozers for agricultural under the ag exemption. Another question, can you cross state lines? This is where the ag exemption gets really, really difficult to understand, is you can, as long as you can cross state lines under the agricultural exemption for 150 air miles or 172 land miles, as long as each state that you're operating in is in their harvest season. Illinois and Missouri make it very easy because Illinois and Missouri are year-round harvest seasons. Iowa is not. We've run into this question a lot, specifically because of the fertilizer plant just across the river in Weaver, Iowa. Iowa has two very specific planting and harvesting seasons. I'm going to look up to my left because that's where I keep it because we get this question so much. In Iowa, their planting season is March 15th through June 30th, and their harvest season is October 4th through December 2nd. So during those two periods of time, you can claim the agricultural exemption in Iowa, but if you are not in the middle of those two periods of time, you will not be able to claim the agricultural exemption. That is really where the challenge is. Indiana is 11 months out of the year because 11 months, the month of December, Indiana is not from December 2nd till December 31st. Indiana is not in their harvest season. Kentucky and Wisconsin both have about 9 months that they operate in their agricultural harvest and planting seasons. Crossing state lines with livestock. Livestock same thing applies with Jennifer threw that one out there for us. Livestock does qualify for the agricultural exemption. You can cross the state lines just like any other ag commodity as long as those states are both observing their harvest season. So make sure when you're hauling livestock in multiple states, each state has a different harvest season. Literally, every state has a completely different harvest season. I would say a lot have year-round, but when I say a lot, I'm talking about 50%. You're going to have to check with each state. I have a list here at the office. If you're curious about a particular state, shoot me a text or a Facebook message a little later on. I'll try to help you out with that. But each state has its own specific harvest season that you can claim the agricultural exemption. For those that operate within just Illinois, it's very easy for you because it is year-round. And if you operate in Missouri, it is also year-round. But that's how the ag exemption works with livestock. So another question we've gotten a lot recently is seed considered agricultural exempt? And seed is actually part of the agricultural process. So under the FMCSA's new interpretation, seed would qualify moving to ag retail or wholesale locations. So that's another process that has been expanded by FMCSA's definition of what is an agricultural commodity. So another one that we get a lot is anhydrous ammonia. Anhydrous ammonia used to have its own exemption. It technically still does. They never really took it away, but anhydrous ammonia's exemption used to be 100 air miles from the source was ag exempt. And now anhydrous ammonia, you actually get a farther range operating under the agricultural exemption because anhydrous ammonia is exempt at 150 air miles. So you can claim anhydrous ammonia under both of those exemptions, hours of service exemptions. So that is something to kind of keep in mind also. Definitely open to any questions if anybody has any. Again, the ag exemption can get really complicated. Private carriers, for hire carriers, can both claim the agricultural exemption. So that doesn't preclude anybody from being able to haul their own stuff and still claim the ag exemption. You can still do that. But it is 150 air mile radius. That's something we don't talk a lot about, is that air mile radius, but that question comes up a lot now with ELDs, is what is actually 150 air mile radius? 150 air mile radius is 172 land miles. So that is that's statute miles, however you want to calculate it, map miles. That's the distance. It's 172 map miles. So I'm going to give a quick scenario under the new ag exemption to maybe help people understand how this works. I did one earlier. I'm going to do another one where this is a part that we haven't got clarity from FMCSA on, is when does the source become relevant whenever you're hauling agricultural commodities. Let's say I'm operating out of Springfield. I pick up a load of hogs, because let's say I'm hauling hogs. And I'm going to haul hogs to Kansas City. So I leave Springfield and I go to Beardstown to pick up my load of hogs. I'm still operating under the agricultural ag exemption at this point, so I'm not recording anything on my logbook. I pick up my load of hogs. It takes an hour and a half to load my hogs. I've got an hour already in, so I'm 2.5 hours in. I begin my drive to Kansas City. I decide to take a route that takes me down through northern Missouri. So I'm ag exempt for 172 miles. So 3 hours later, so essentially 6.5 hours later, I have the ability to turn on my logbooks. But I'm actually bringing a load of hogs also back once I drop off. And my pickup point for my next load of hogs is within 150 air miles of my drop-off point, Kansas City, and it is also overlapping my 172 land miles coming from Beardstown. So the question is do you turn your logbook on or off? We have not gotten clarity from FMCSA as to when your source becomes a part of your logbooking mode of operation. There are many of those that will say once you're within 172 land miles of your next source, if you know you're being dispatched there, you can turn that ELD or stop recording on your logbook. There are those that say you cannot start your 150 air mile exemption until you have completed your first load. So there is a tremendous discrepancy right now as to whether you can turn that logbook on or turn that logbook off as soon as you get within 150 air miles of your next source. Right now, we're under the assumption that you should or you can. We have submitted the request to FMCSA for clarity. As a matter of fact, I know Illinois State Police has also submitted that request to get clarity on what is the source. And but essentially, that Kansas City run and back, you could be completely hours of service exempt as long as your 250 air mile radius is overlap. And that's really where we're trying to get some clarity for you because law enforcement on roadside is going to be very unclear on this. Because if you don't remember, in the very beginning of this webinar, we talked about the original MAP 21 150 air mile radius exemption always was understood by all law enforcement that if you go beyond 150 air miles with your load, you're to log the entire event. And that's not the case now because FMCSA, even though they clearly say on their website that they have not changed any of the base rules, they have completely changed their interpretation of the agricultural exemption. I've gotten a lot of questions as to why they changed that agricultural exemption. Their answer to that is that they felt that this is what Congress originally intended, and that if they did not change the way they interpreted the agricultural exemption back in July, then Congress was going to legislate them to do so. So they felt it in the best interest to change that interpretation through basically an ELD, frequently asked questions docket, and notified really no one. It was very subtly announced that they had changed that interpretation and expanded that interpretation, and that's why it's so late for everybody to understand. That's why there's some difficulty there. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you've got some questions on this, this is your chance to get a live answer with them. We're more than happy to get any of your questions answered. The reason this is such a big deal is because it truly affects how many livestock haulers or agricultural haulers may work with the ELD mandate that's coming in about 6 weeks. We're going to be doing another live webinar event talking about exemptions to the ELD mandate, either later today or probably tomorrow, though, to help you guys understand that they've actually expanded some of the ELD exemptions. For the large part of most operators, the ELD are still a reality of life if you're using logbooks in your day-to-day operations. So just wanted to bring you guys some clarity on what the agricultural exemption, how it works. You have to be aware of what state you're operating in and what their agricultural harvest planting seasons are, because that plays into the ag exemption a lot, is being aware of what those are during those states. So always stay on top of what state you're operating in, because if they're not in their harvest season, hence what Iowa produces a ton of problems, because their agricultural season is such a biased split, unusual compared to a lot of others. It can really cause a lot of problems whenever you get pulled over roadside or at the scale houses when your logbooks aren't quite reflective. Even though you may assume that you're operating under the agricultural exemption, if that state isn't observing its harvest season, you're not going to be operating under the agricultural exemption. So your best hope is that you can either happen to have been caught under the 100 air mile radius and operate under the short haul, or you're going to have to make sure you logbook once you hit that state line where they are not observing their agriculture harvest seasons, whatever that is. So had a few guys jump in here late. If you guys have any questions, love to help you out with those when it comes to the ag exemption. But the ag exemption has recently changed with FMCSA, and we wanted to make sure you guys were aware of it. So take a chance. This Facebook live video should be on our feed for a while. Go back through it. If you've got some questions, shoot us a note on Facebook Messenger or give us a quick call. We're always happy to help you guys out and understanding these things. We're soon going to be doing another Facebook live event to be able to bring you the ELD exemption list and kind of update you on what is actually exempt from ELDs. But understanding your agricultural exemption, if you choose to use it, can actually help you tremendously. And for many of our carriers, it may be able to keep them from having to comply with the ELD mandate, at least in the near future, until things are shaken out a little bit more. So I don't have anything more on the ag exemption unless you have some questions. I did have one throw up. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that. Ag exempt fuel haulers in the fall. Unless you can guarantee, we kind of covered this with dryer gas, unless you can guarantee that entire load, and you have a bill of lading that shows that entire load is being delivered to a farm or an agricultural production event, then yes, you could claim that, although I would call that an extremely gray area. But this is, this is really the challenge when you're trying to fit that in. The bill of lading for something like fuel or dryer gas has to be either completely to a farm, or you can absolutely prove every ounce of that fuel is going into agricultural production. If you're delivering it to a rack service, or if you're delivering it to someone who redistributes, I'm going to say you're going to have a very tough time making it work under the ag exemption. Got another question here. Load of cattle to be hauled 900 miles. After delivery, you're dispatched 75 miles out from delivery to reload. After your map 21 runs out, you'll be reloading close. Will it go back and catch enough miles to let you haul the entire 900-mile load? No. This is a good question, Bruce. And so you've got a load of cattle to be hauled 900 miles. The first 172 air miles, as long as you're in a state that's observing its harvest season, the entire time you take within 172 air miles of picking up that load, you're going to be exempt from hours of service. Once you get 172 out, or you hit a state line that is not observing harvest season, you have to start your logbook. And from that point, until you actually get within, if you know you're going to be dispatched 75 miles from delivery to reload, if you know that, once you get within 172 air miles of your drop-off or your next delivery point, wherever that radius is, you can turn your logbook back off, however that works. And you will stay off until you get 172 air miles back out of that radius with your next load. So that's how it works with the map 21, the change interpretation. You don't get the entire 900-mile load exempt. You get the front end, and you can get the back end since you're loading 75 miles out. Whenever you hit that radius from your loading point, from your next loading point, not from where you're dropping off at, but from your next loading point, you shut your logbooks off. And because you're operating within 172 air miles of your next load, which is the source, and the entire time you're in that radius, and so it'd be kind of like having this is where you're loading, and this is the end of your 900-mile run, and right over here is where your next load is. Once you get 172 miles away from your drop-off point, you can turn your logbooks off. And over here, you got your 172 air miles, boom, right here. So this point to this point, you're going to have to log. But on each end, you're not going to have to log. Fun, huh? So, but that's pretty much how it works. I'm not going to take up too much more time. We would love to make sure we keep doing these Facebook Live events. If you have any questions, be sure to give our office a call. It's 217-525-0310. My name is Matt Wells, and you can also reach out to us on Facebook. We're pretty good about getting myself or Don Bert Schaefer is pretty good about getting back to anybody that reaches out to us on Facebook, or you can send me an email at mattw@midwesttruckers.com. Other than that, happy to have you guys here today. If you have any other questions, we look forward to answering them. Thank you very much. See you guys.